Amira Saleh stepped into a life of luxury with her husband Faris Al-Mansoori, dreaming of happiness, while Faris's obsession and rage lurked beneath the surface. And on their wedding night, that dream turned into a nightmare of blood, betrayal, and shocking violence. Amira Saleh had always dreamed of a life far beyond the narrow streets and modest buildings of her childhood neighborhood in the UAE. She grew up watching the city skyline and imagining a future filled with opportunity, luxury, and security. Her family, humble but loving, encouraged her to seek education and ambition, reminding her that life could be more than what she had seen every day. Amira excelled in school and cultivated a quiet elegance, combining intelligence with grace in a way that drew attention wherever she went. When the proposal from Faris Al-Mansoori came, it felt like a gateway to the life she had envisioned for herself. Faris was a man of wealth and influence, known in Dubai for his business ventures, luxury lifestyle, and connections to the city's elite. At first, he seemed like a dream match, someone who could provide both protection and a world of opportunities beyond what Amira had ever imagined. The wedding preparations were grand, reflecting Faris's status and the expectations of high society. Invitations were sent to the most influential families, and the event was held in a luxurious hotel overlooking the city lights. Chandeliers sparkled, tables were adorned with rare flowers, and live music added to the atmosphere of opulence. Amira, dressed in a gown of ivory silk and delicate embroidery, felt both excitement and apprehension. She admired the beauty around her, yet a small, uneasy feeling lingered, a subtle awareness that this world was vastly different from her own. She tried to focus on the joy of the day, on the laughter and applause, but she could not shake the sense of being constantly observed, measured, and evaluated. Faris arrived, impeccably dressed, exuding confidence and charm. To the guests, he seemed the perfect groom, attentive and charismatic, but Amira noticed details that others did not. The intensity of his gaze, the careful control he exerted over every interaction, the way he orchestrated the timing of each event as if it were a performance. Even small decisions, such as the positioning of the chairs or the sequencing of the dinner, were dictated by him. While everyone else saw perfection, Amira felt the weight of scrutiny, a silent pressure to meet expectations she barely understood. The ceremony proceeded without incident, with Amira fulfilling her role gracefully. Photographers captured every moment, from the first step down the aisle to the ceremonial exchange of rings. Family and friends offered congratulations, and the applause seemed endless. Yet beneath the glittering surface, an unspoken tension existed. Amira felt it in the way Faris touched her arm, in the way he subtly corrected her posture, and in the intensity of his attention. It was not anger or malice, but control, precise and unyielding, and she sensed that stepping out of line could provoke consequences she could not yet imagine. When the celebrations concluded, the couple departed for the penthouse that would serve as their first home together. The space was modern, filled with mirrored surfaces, high-end furniture, and an overwhelming sense of wealth. It was luxurious beyond anything Amira had experienced, yet it felt cold, structured, and suffocating in its perfection. Faris continued his subtle monitoring, arranging the rooms, adjusting lights, and directing her movements as though the environment itself needed to conform to his will. By the end of the night, Amira's excitement had dimmed. The grandeur of the wedding, which had seemed so magical hours earlier, now felt like a trap. She realized that her life with Faris, though glamorous, would demand careful navigation, constant compliance, and silent vigilance. The penthouse, once a symbol of luxury, had transformed into a space of control. What had begun as a dream now carried an undercurrent of fear. Even amidst opulence, Amira understood that appearances could be deceiving, and that the true challenge of her new life was only just beginning. The first days after the wedding were meant to be a time of celebration, but for Amira, they quickly became a period of tension and unease. Faris's controlling nature, which had been subtle during the wedding, became more pronounced behind closed doors. In the luxurious penthouse, every detail seemed orchestrated to assert his dominance. He decided meal times, dictated the lighting and temperature, and carefully monitored Amira's every action. Even the clothes she wore were subject to his approval. At first, she tried to comply, convincing herself that his behavior was a reflection of care and attention. But the longer she stayed under his watchful eye, the more suffocating the control felt. Amira had grown up valuing independence, yet suddenly she found herself living in a world where autonomy was impossible. Even small acts like choosing what to drink or where to sit required silent approval. The penthouse, with its mirrored walls and immaculate design, felt less like a home and more like a stage, with Faris as the director and her as the performer. Every movement, every gesture was observed and subtly evaluated. This constant scrutiny created a sense of paranoia, leaving Amira tense, anxious, and unsure of herself. The tension reached its breaking point when Faris discovered Amira's medical records. She had never intended for anyone to see them. They were private documents she had carefully safeguarded. But in a moment of control, or perhaps suspicion, Faris insisted on reviewing her personal information. The records revealed that Amira was infertile, a truth she had accepted privately but never shared. Faris's reaction was immediate and shocking. His composed demeanor, which had been meticulously maintained throughout the wedding and celebrations, shattered within minutes. What had seemed like minor irritations and strictness now erupted into anger and disbelief. Faris's perception of betrayal was overwhelming. In his mind, Amira had deliberately deceived him, and his carefully constructed vision of family and legacy felt threatened. Amira attempted to remain calm, hoping that reason and patience might diffuse the situation, but Faris's mind was already consumed with rage. The penthouse, which had once been a symbol of wealth and status, transformed into a cage where danger lurked in every shadow. In the days leading up to this discovery, Amira had noticed small signs of obsession. Faris checked her phone, monitored her interactions with staff, and subtly questioned her about past experiences. She had dismissed these behaviors as quirks of a wealthy, protective husband, but now the obsession revealed itself in full force, fueled by fear, pride, and an irrational sense of entitlement. Amira realized that she was no longer just a wife. She had become a target in a private battle she could not control. The psychological weight of the discovery was immense. Amira experienced anxiety, insomnia, and a growing sense of dread. Every interaction with Faris carried potential danger. The luxury surrounding her, fine furniture, expensive artwork, and panoramic city views could not mask the underlying threat. The penthouse had become a place of calculated tension, where Faris's obsession dictated every decision, and Amira's life was suddenly precarious. Isolation compounded her vulnerability. She had no family nearby, no trusted friend to confide in, and little knowledge of legal protections. Every attempt to speak or resist was met with subtle threats or cold indifference. In her mind, the weight of the situation became unbearable. She understood with frightening clarity that Faris's obsession was not a temporary anger, but a long-term fixation that could escalate unpredictably. By the end of the week, the honeymoon period was over. What had been meant to mark the beginning of a joyful marriage instead had become a psychological battlefield. The penthouse, the city skyline, and the lavish lifestyle, all symbols of success and luxury, had turned into instruments of control and fear. Amira faced a reality she had never imagined. Her husband's love was inseparable from his obsession, and the consequences of discovery had only just begun. The stage was set for a tragedy she could not yet foresee. Faris's perception of betrayal, fueled by secrecy and pride, was a storm gathering in silence, and Amira, despite her intelligence and composure, was caught in its center, vulnerable and alone.
The night of the tragedy arrived with a sense of foreboding that Amira could feel in every corner of the penthouse. The city below sparkled with lights and life, a stark contrast to the darkness building inside the apartment. Faris's anger over the discovery of her medical records had been simmering for days, and now it boiled over in a way that was terrifying and unstoppable. The luxury that at once surrounded her, the marble floors, mirrored walls, and gleaming furniture, felt like a cage designed to trap her. She understood with chilling clarity that no help could reach her quickly and no intervention would come from the outside. Faris's obsession with control reached a horrifying climax. He confronted Amira with accusations of deception, betrayal, and dishonor. Her attempts to explain, to reason, or to calm him were ignored. In his mind, the revelation about her infertility had shattered his perfect image of marriage, family, and legacy, and he saw only one way to reclaim control. Every word he spoke, every movement he made, carried a sense of finality, as if he had already decided the outcome of the night. The first strike came suddenly, a flash of violence that left Amira stunned and struggling to comprehend the reality unfolding. She tried to escape, to move toward doors or windows, but the penthouse's layout and Faris's sheer size and strength left her trapped. Each attempt to flee was blocked, each defensive action met with escalating brutality. Amira's fear became acute, a living presence in every second as she realized that her life was at immediate risk. Faris's rage seemed to have no limits. He attacked with a knife, stabbing Amira 15 times in rapid succession. The blows were calculated, not chaotic. They were the product of a mind consumed by anger and obsession. Each wound carried a mixture of hatred, panic, and an overwhelming need to assert dominance. Amira's attempts to fight back were desperate but insufficient, the sharp metal and Faris's aggression overpowering her every movement. The sounds of the attack barely reached the city beyond. Neighbors, accustomed to the normal hum of urban life, heard only muffled noises and assumed it was a late-night argument. The penthouse, with its soundproofed walls and high-end construction, contained the horror entirely within. Outside, the world remained unaware, leaving Amira entirely alone in the midst of violence. Faris attempted to control not only the act itself, but also the aftermath. He cleaned surfaces, wiped fingerprints, and tried to erase evidence as if the mere appearance of crime could be removed. In his mind, the narrative had to remain intact, appearances were paramount, and his image as a wealthy, perfect husband had to be preserved. Every action after the attack reflected a chilling combination of intelligence and moral corruption, a man manipulating the scene of a crime with meticulous care. By dawn, the situation had escalated to a point beyond concealment. Hotel staff, noticing the unusual silence from the apartment, attempted to check on the couple. Faris maintained his calm facade, denying any wrongdoing, but surveillance cameras recorded the terrifying truth. The images revealed the violence, the struggle, and the calculated actions, making the crime impossible to obscure entirely. Amira, meanwhile, lay critically injured. The penthouse, designed for elegance and luxury, had become a scene of horror and death. What had started as a night of celebration, marking the beginning of a new life with Faris, had ended in blood, fear, and betrayal. The stark contrast between the city's glamour and the tragedy within the walls highlighted the dark undercurrent of obsession, control, and unchecked rage. This night marked a turning point, not only for Amira's life, but for the perception of wealth, power, and domestic vulnerability.
The opulence around her had masked danger, and the person she trusted most had become her executioner. The story that began with celebration had become a chilling narrative of obsession, betrayal, and murder, setting the stage for a legal and societal reckoning that would follow in the days to come.
The investigation into Amira Saleh's murder began almost immediately, and Dubai authorities approached the case with intensity and precision. The surveillance footage from the penthouse complex provided clear evidence of the timeline, showing movements, interactions, and moments that contradicted Faris Al-Mansoori's initial claims. Forensic experts meticulously documented the scene, noting the pattern and depth of the knife wounds, blood spatter, and other physical evidence. Each detail revealed the calculated nature of the attack, painting a picture of premeditation rather than a momentary lapse of anger. Medical examinations confirmed the cause of death and highlighted the brutality of the assault. Amira had been stabbed 15 times, and the placement of the wounds indicated both rage and control. The violence was targeted and precise, showing that Faris had acted with a cold, focused intent. Every injury spoke of a mind obsessed with dominance, a man who could not tolerate what he perceived as deception or betrayal. The physical evidence alone made it clear that this was not a spontaneous crime of passion, but the culmination of mounting tension and obsession that had gone unchecked. Authorities also uncovered a disturbing pattern in Faris's behavior leading up to the murder. Hidden messages, videos, and records indicated a growing fixation on controlling Amira. He monitored her communications, questioned her interactions with others, and displayed signs of paranoia that suggested he had been planning ways to assert absolute control. Each piece of evidence added weight to the case, demonstrating that Faris had systematically isolated and manipulated his wife long before the fatal night. The investigation extended beyond the penthouse. Dubai police examined hotel staff, neighbors, and anyone who might have seen unusual activity. Although no one had witnessed the attack directly, several individuals reported small anomalies, late-night movements, unexplained security requests, and odd patterns in Faris's interactions with Amira. These seemingly minor observations provided context that reinforced the forensic evidence, giving investigators a more complete understanding of the events that led to the murder. As the case became public, media outlets amplified the story. Headlines highlighted the shocking nature of the crime, focusing on the wealth, power, and influence surrounding Faris. International attention followed, painting a picture of a young bride brutally killed by a husband whose obsession over control and perceived betrayal had turned deadly. Public outrage grew, but the detailed evidence collected by authorities ensured that the narrative remained grounded in facts rather than speculation. During questioning, Faris maintained a facade of composure, but subtle cracks revealed his inner turmoil. Investigators noted inconsistencies in his statements, attempts to deflect blame, and careful omissions. These behaviors, combined with physical evidence, strengthened the case against him, leaving little room for doubt. Faris's public persona of charm and affluence had masked a dangerous obsession, but the investigation exposed the stark contrast between appearance and reality. Forensic experts also noted the psychological dimensions of the crime. Patterns of control, intimidation, and isolation indicated a level of premeditation informed by a need to dominate and punish. This insight provided a broader understanding of the motive, helping prosecutors build a case that framed the murder as the tragic outcome of obsession, entitlement, and the inability to accept personal limitations. By the time the investigation concluded, the evidence painted a clear and horrifying picture. Faris's actions were deliberate, methodical, and driven by a toxic mix of pride, rage, and control. The crime scene, medical reports, surveillance footage, and witness statements collectively created an unassailable case.
Amira's murder, though initially shrouded in shock and disbelief, became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked power and obsession within domestic relationships. It not only brought clarity, but also began to shape public discourse on domestic violence, power dynamics, and the risks inherent in relationships where control is prioritized over care. It set the stage for the legal proceedings that would follow, ensuring that justice for Amira was pursued with the full force of the law. The trial of Faris Al-Mansoori captured the attention of Dubai and the wider international community. From the start, prosecutors presented a case that left no room for doubt. Every piece of evidence gathered during the meticulous investigation was laid out clearly. Forensic reports, surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and documentation of Faris's obsessive behavior. The combination of physical and psychological evidence created a narrative that was both horrifying and undeniable, demonstrating the full extent of premeditation that had led to Amira Saleh's death. During the proceedings, the court examined the timeline of events in detail. Investigators explained how Faris had methodically isolated Amira, monitored her communications, and controlled her movements in the days leading up to the murder. This evidence established a clear pattern of behavior, highlighting that the murder was not a spontaneous act of anger, but the culmination of obsession and control. Experts in forensic psychology described his actions as consistent with someone driven by a dangerous mixture of pride, entitlement, and rage when faced with a situation he could not control. Faris's defense attempted to argue that the murder had been a sudden, uncontrollable reaction to the discovery of Amira's infertility. They claimed that he had acted impulsively in a moment of emotional distress. However, the evidence contradicted this narrative. The number and placement of the stab wounds, along with the deliberate steps taken to conceal the crime, indicated careful planning and intent. The prosecution emphasized that Faris's actions had been calculated, highlighting how he had sought to maintain control over both the situation and the appearance of normalcy. The courtroom was tense as testimonies recounted Faris's controlling behaviors and the chilling details of the murder. Staff from the hotel, neighbors, and forensic experts painted a vivid picture of the penthouse that had become a cage for Amira. Each account reinforced the reality that Faris's obsession had escalated dangerously and that Amira had been trapped with little chance to escape. The public, watching from outside the courtroom, was both shocked and horrified, struggling to comprehend how wealth and status could mask such lethal intent. Legal analysts noted the broader implications of the case. Faris's trial highlighted issues of domestic violence within affluent households, where power and resources can be used to manipulate, intimidate, and control. It also drew attention to the importance of vigilance, protection, and legal safeguards for spouses who may be vulnerable in situations where appearances conceal danger. The case became a reference point for both law enforcement and advocacy groups, illustrating how control and obsession can escalate into deadly violence. As the trial progressed, the evidence continued to weigh heavily against Faris. Each attempt by the defense to humanize him or reduce responsibility was undermined by the meticulous documentation of his behavior. From surveillance footage to medical reports, the case left little room for ambiguity. It became clear that the man who had presented himself as charming, successful, and powerful had orchestrated a sequence of events that resulted in the brutal death of his bride. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. Faris Al-Mansoori was found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sentence reflected not only the severity of the crime, but also the broader societal implications. Justice, in this case, extended beyond the individual. It sent a message about accountability, the dangers of unchecked power, and the importance of protecting vulnerable individuals in domestic settings. The case became a reference point for both law enforcement and advocacy groups, illustrating how control and obsession can escalate into deadly violence. Though the trial concluded, the impact of Amira's story continued. Her death became a symbol of the risks hidden behind wealth, luxury, and social status. It sparked conversations about domestic violence, control, and the warning signs of obsession in relationships. Families, legal experts, and advocacy organizations studied the case to prevent similar tragedies, using Amira's story as both a cautionary tale and a call to action. In the end, while justice could not restore Amira's life, it reaffirmed that truth and accountability could prevail even against wealth, power, and pretense. Her legacy remained in the lessons learned and the awareness raised, a reminder that appearances can deceive and that vigilance and courage are essential in confronting control, obsession, and violence.
Years passed after the trial, and life outside the courtroom began to settle into a quieter rhythm, though the echoes of Amira Saleh's tragedy lingered in subtle ways. For the public, her story had become a cautionary tale, a shocking reminder that wealth and appearances could mask danger. For legal professionals, it was a case study in premeditated domestic violence, offering lessons on surveillance, behavioral analysis, and the signs of escalating control. Amira's death continued to influence policy discussions, inspiring new conversations about the protection of vulnerable spouses, even in affluent and seemingly secure households. For those who had known her personally, Amira's absence was a deep, unhealable wound. Family members and close friends struggled to reconcile the vibrant, ambitious woman they had celebrated on her wedding day with the tragic fate she had suffered. The photographs of her smiling at the ceremony, once tokens of joy, became reminders of how quickly circumstances could shift from celebration to horror. Her story underscored the fragility of trust in relationships where power dynamics are unbalanced and left a lingering sense of caution and sorrow among those who had loved her. Amira's death also left a lasting mark on public discourse in Dubai and beyond. Advocates for women's rights used the case to highlight the importance of education, independence, and legal awareness for spouses entering arranged or high-pressure marriages. Seminars, workshops, and legal clinics referenced her story as a real-world example of the risks associated with control and obsession. Policymakers began to examine how domestic violence could be prevented in households where status, influence, and wealth might allow perpetrators to act without immediate consequences. Her legacy, though born of tragedy, became a catalyst for awareness and change. Meanwhile, Faris Al-Mansoori remained incarcerated, his life dramatically altered by the consequences of his actions. The luxurious lifestyle he had once curated with meticulous attention was replaced by the stark, controlled environment of prison. For him, wealth and status no longer offered protection, and the carefully constructed facade of perfection had crumbled completely. Inside, he faced the weight of accountability and the psychological reality of a life confined by his own choices. The contrast between his previous power and current imprisonment underscored the ultimate limits of wealth and control when confronted by justice. For the broader community, Amira's story remained a topic of reflection. Media outlets continued to revisit the details from time to time, exploring aspects of the case that highlighted societal pressures, cultural expectations, and the dangers of unbalanced relationships. Readers and viewers were drawn to the narrative not simply because of the violence, but because it illustrated how appearances could deceive. The narrative became a teaching tool, a story that emphasized vigilance, awareness, and the need for personal autonomy in even the most seemingly secure environments.
Within this ongoing public reflection, Amira's personal legacy also evolved. Memorials, both formal and informal, were created by family and friends to honor her life. Charities and advocacy programs sometimes referenced her name, using it to inspire support for women facing domestic challenges or entering marriages under pressure. Her life, though tragically cut short, became a symbol of resilience and a reminder of the importance of protecting those who might be vulnerable, regardless of wealth, status, or public perception. Even in death, Amira Saleh's presence influenced change. Her story illuminated the darker dimensions of control, obsession, and domestic power, creating awareness that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. Families, legal authorities, and advocacy organizations continued to study the details of her life and death, ensuring that her legacy extended beyond grief into education, vigilance, and societal reflection. The impact of her story became a persistent reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that justice, when pursued diligently, can protect the innocent, even if it comes too late to save them. Amira's life and death, intertwined with wealth, obsession, and control, left an indelible mark on all who learned her story. It became clear that the lessons she imparted were far larger than any individual tragedy. They were about awareness, prevention, and the enduring power of truth in the face of deception and abuse. Her memory lived on, quietly shaping policies, conversations, and the consciousness of a society learning, slowly but surely, from the mistakes that had cost her life.
Even years after the trial, the consequences of Amira Saleh's death continued to reverberate quietly but profoundly. While Faris Al-Mansoori remained incarcerated, the ripple effects of his crime extended far beyond prison walls. Families, legal authorities, and social organizations began to examine the structural and cultural conditions that had allowed such a tragedy to occur. The story of a bride murdered on her wedding night became a symbol of the hidden dangers that could exist behind wealth, luxury, and social status. It was a stark reminder that appearances could deceive, and even the most glamorous lives could conceal fear, control, and danger. Amira's family, though forever changed, took steps to honor her memory by advocating for awareness and safety in domestic relationships. They spoke at workshops and forums about the importance of education, autonomy, and the legal rights of spouses entering marriages under pressure or in high-stakes social environments. Their grief became a tool for change, channeling sorrow into a mission to prevent similar tragedies. The narrative of her life and death was used to teach lessons about warning signs, manipulation, and the consequences of unchecked obsession. Meanwhile, the legal system in Dubai took note of the case's broader implications. Training programs for law enforcement officers incorporated aspects of Amira's story, emphasizing the importance of early intervention in cases of domestic control, the psychological patterns of obsession, and the need for meticulous documentation of potential warning signs. Social workers and legal advocates used the case as an example of how wealth and power could be used to manipulate evidence, intimidate witnesses, and isolate victims. The trial had set a precedent showing that justice could prevail even against those with vast influence, but it also highlighted areas in which protections for vulnerable individuals could be strengthened. Public awareness campaigns arose organically from the case. News outlets and social media discussions explored issues surrounding domestic violence, marital coercion, and the dangers of prioritizing appearances over safety. Advocates encouraged individuals to seek help if they felt trapped or controlled in relationships, while emphasizing that resources and legal avenues were available even in households with considerable social or financial power. Amira's story became an enduring cautionary tale, demonstrating the lethal potential of obsession and the need for vigilance in all domestic situations.
Faris's imprisonment served as a stark illustration of accountability. Once a man of influence and luxury, he was now confined to a life defined by punishment and isolation. The stark contrast between his past freedom and his current reality became a point of discussion in media and legal circles, reinforcing the lesson that power cannot shield individuals from the consequences of their actions. Even with wealth, social status, and public admiration, criminal behavior carried inevitable repercussions. For society at large, Amira's story reinforced the importance of examining relationships beyond appearances. It emphasized the need for trust, respect, and communication, while also highlighting the risks of secrecy, manipulation, and control. Families began to question traditional assumptions about marriage, status, and obedience, and advocacy groups gained momentum in educating communities about recognizing and addressing domestic threats. Even decades later, Amira Saleh's legacy continued quietly but powerfully. Memorials and charitable initiatives kept her memory alive, often without fanfare, while professionals and advocates incorporated lessons from her life into education, prevention programs, and legal frameworks. Her story became a guidepost, teaching future generations to recognize danger, prioritize safety, and value autonomy. Ultimately, the tragedy that began in a penthouse filled with luxury and expectation ended as a story of resilience and awareness. Amira's life, though cut tragically short, became an enduring force for change. Her experience highlighted the dark potential of obsession, the necessity of vigilance, and the enduring power of truth. Even in death, she influenced lives, legal systems, and public consciousness, leaving a lasting mark that extended far beyond the night that took her life. Her story served as a solemn reminder. Even behind wealth, status, and charm, danger can lurk. But truth and accountability can prevail, shaping society for the better.
Years after the trial, Amira Saleh's story continued to reverberate in ways few could have predicted. While Faris Al-Mansoori remained incarcerated, her legacy extended far beyond the courtroom and the headlines. Her tragedy had exposed the dark intersections of wealth, power, and control, creating conversations in homes, workplaces, and educational institutions about the dangers of obsession and the importance of vigilance. Amira's life, though brutally cut short, became a cautionary tale and a catalyst for change, compelling society to examine relationships, power structures, and the consequences of silence. In communities across Dubai and the UAE, the story of her murder prompted increased awareness of domestic violence in affluent households. Advocates used her case to emphasize that wealth and status could never be assumed to guarantee safety. Workshops and seminars taught people to recognize controlling behaviors, subtle manipulation, and early warning signs of psychological abuse. Her experience illustrated the importance of legal protections, education, and autonomy, especially for women entering high-pressure or arranged marriages. Amira's name became synonymous with vigilance and advocacy, a quiet but persistent reminder that tragedy could strike even behind the most glamorous facades. Amira's family continued to honor her memory in both public and private ways. They established foundations and contributed to programs designed to support women facing domestic threats, providing counseling, legal guidance, and emergency resources. Her parents and siblings became vocal advocates for systemic change, emphasizing the need for early intervention and robust support networks. Their grief became a driving force, channeling sorrow into tangible impact. Through their efforts, Amira's story began to save lives even after hers had been tragically cut short. In legal circles, the case became a reference point for training law enforcement, social workers, and legal professionals.
It highlighted the importance of thorough documentation, surveillance, and pattern recognition when dealing with cases of domestic control and abuse. Experts analyzed Faris's behavior as a textbook example of escalating obsession, demonstrating how isolation, manipulation, and power could culminate in extreme violence. Law enforcement agencies began incorporating lessons from the case into protocols designed to protect vulnerable individuals, ensuring that future cases could be identified and addressed more effectively. Public discourse surrounding the case evolved over time. Journalists, writers, and documentary filmmakers explored Amira's story from multiple angles, focusing not only on the sensational aspects of wealth and violence, but also on the psychological and societal implications. Articles and reports highlighted issues such as marital coercion, the abuse of power, and the hidden dangers of relationships in which appearances are carefully curated. Amira's story shifted from mere tragedy to a meaningful narrative about awareness, autonomy, and the consequences of unchecked obsession. Even the younger generation learned of her life through educational programs and media coverage. High schools and universities discussed her case as part of courses on psychology, law, and social studies, using it to illustrate real-world implications of control, manipulation, and domestic violence. Her story became a teaching tool, showing how societal expectations, privilege, and secrecy could create environments where danger thrived. The lessons were clear. Trust and vigilance were essential, and no level of wealth or status could protect against the consequences of obsession. Faris's incarceration continued to serve as a stark reminder of accountability. Once a man of immense influence and privilege, he was now confined, stripped of freedom, and entirely dependent on the legal system that he had once believed he could manipulate. The contrast between his former power and current punishment underscored the limits of wealth and status when confronted by justice. Amira's legacy persisted not through sensational headlines, but through education, advocacy, and awareness. Her life and death became a force for societal reflection, prompting systemic improvements in protection, policy, and perception. The tragedy that had begun in a penthouse of luxury became a lasting story of vigilance, empowerment, and the enduring power of truth. In every lecture, article, and program inspired by her experience, Amira Saleh's story lived on, shaping a future in which awareness and action could prevent similar tragedies and honor her memory in the most meaningful way possible.